Welcome to the Neurodiverse Lens, a CDL podcast featuring Carolyn and Jordan.
Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the Neurodiverse Lens. You're here with myself, Carolyn, and Jordan. We're from the Center for Diverse Learners, and this is our podcast where we talk about issues surrounding neurodiversity from both a professional and a personal lens.
Today, we are going to be talking about disclosing neurodiversity, especially in the workplace, when, why, and how. So disclosure can be a very deeply personal choice, whether at work, school, or within relationships. But today we're going to have a focus on at work. In this episode, we're going to be kind of talking about how people can make that decision and what support might look like along the way. So disclosure is a topic that comes up all the time. Let's kind of talk about how adults, especially in the workplace, can navigate the choice to disclose their neurodiversity.
I'm really glad we're talking about this today, and you told me we're getting a lot of comments about this, so I'm glad we're tackling it. I want to say from the get-go that disclosure is not something anyone has to do. Mm-hmm. That this is a decision that is really personal based on your own set of circumstances, and you're still a member of our community, even if you don't want to disclose at work. There should be no pressure ever to disclose other than for your own personal benefit. You don't need to do it for the community. You don't need to do it to represent. You want to understand how it's going to affect you in your career. Because the reason we have a podcast is because stigma still exists. Mm-hmm. If we existed in a world where CDL reached our vision, which is a world where neurodiverse individuals naturally get what they need, we wouldn't have a podcast. There wouldn't be a whole lot to say. The stigma exists and is real, and there is both on the surface bias, things you can really see, and people also have unconscious biases. And disclosing may cause other people to have unconscious biases about you. So those are some things that you really want to consider before disclosing or choosing to disclose in the workplace. So I guess that leads us into why you may want to disclose. Yeah. And I'm probably the worst person to talk about this because I didn't disclose my neurodiversity. First of all, I wasn't diagnosed until my 30s, so there was nothing to diagnose. And then I didn't diagnose until I was working at CDL, where I knew disclosing any impact that it might have on my career long term was more important to be a voice for my community, so that when I am speaking about neurodiversity, when I'm going into the community and talking about it, people understand that it is coming from both that professional lens. For those of you who this might be your first episode, I have taught in special education my entire career, and personally. So it was an interesting decision to disclose. And at first it was, I identify as a neurodiverse individual. I felt really weird saying I'm an autistic person. I was scared that my version of autism would become, people would confuse. If you haven't heard this saying, if you've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism. Yeah. And I was afraid that I was a bad representative of the community, but slowly I saw the importance of disclosing. So I disclosed at CDL, but I was also the executive director, so I'm in control of my own accommodations, except for when I report to the board. And so I want to acknowledge, I understand why people don't disclose. But now looking back, I'm like, why didn't I disclose? Because what our whole organization is about is somewhat based on the belief that accommodations and receiving the support you deserve leads to better outcomes. So there's lots of times in work where, had I asked for example, an ability to ask follow-up questions when given instructions in a way that I don't sound like I'm questioning you. Because sometimes someone
Yeah.
can give me instructions and they feel they have been crystal clear and I don't
Right.
understand at all what they mean or say. That would be an accommodation I'd ask for, and I would have been more successful, especially in school. Extra time to complete certain tasks, the ability to always communicate with typing and not by handwriting. All of these things would have made it easier. But I was really afraid of the unconscious biases that people have, that people would hear things
Yeah.
and think things about me that they would know not to say out loud, but would still be in their heads. I do think, though, that things are changing. And one of the things I want to acknowledge with accommodations is you're only telling your employer. So whether that's the HR department, your direct supervisor, every workplace will have a different policy on how you ask for accommodations. If you're coming into a new workplace, look at that employee handbook and study how to ask for accommodations and make sure you follow their steps. If you've been at a place for a long time, you might not even remember where to find that employee handbook, but go seek it
Yeah.
out. Look on how to get those accommodations. So the thing I want to highlight off the bat is there's two ways to disclose at work. There is the disclosing just to HR and your employer, where you're not having to share the details. You're only having to share what you need.
Yeah.
So you're not having to share the nitty gritty. And then there's the type of disclosure that I have while working at CDL, which is part of what I am trying to do to break down barriers is I talk at work a lot about how I work and the things that impact me so that my staff know that it's comfortable to ask for things and so that the community knows that it's okay to ask for things. I feel that weight a little bit of wanting to be an example of how it is okay to be neurodiverse and you can be successful in neurodiverse. So you want to keep in mind how you want to disclose, and both are valid, whether you just want to tell HR and your employer or you want to tell everyone at your workplace who has to deal with you about that piece.
Yeah, I think, especially since you moved into the role of executive director at CDL and being so publicly open about your diagnosis, I feel like it's created such a larger community, not only within the group of employees that work there, but the families we serve as well, because you are so in the community and out there and at events and speaking. It really kind of creates that community of, like we are trying to be the hub where families and students and community members can come and feel fully accepted. And I see that within our workplace as well. As a team, we're able to kind of have those conversations more openly and candidly and really kind of come to an agreement of like, I receive communication best this way or via email, or like I personally don't like tasks being given over Teams messages. So, I like having those face-to-face meetings or virtual meetings where, you can see the person's facial reactions and stuff like that. And then also how you said asking those clarifying questions. I think that's super important. And I feel like as a team at CDL, we've grown so much over the last year and a bit just because of your disclosure and discussions that you have with us.
Wanted to jump in, I do want to highlight, and I want to share both a positive story and a negative story because I want to be careful when we're talking about this disclosure is to not just be raw disclosure, because for some
Yeah.
people there will be real consequences for disclosing. So a positive story, I was doing a training at an organization and I was talking about my experiences as a teacher and being neurodiverse, and someone came up to me and said, in the fall I'm going to teachers college, but I'm autistic. Can I be a teacher? They were so anxious about it. They're like, I still think maybe not. And they're signed up to go to teachers college. And I was like, absolutely.
Yeah.
And so being able to share my story and have that moment where someone can see what it would be like to be a teacher with autism was really important. But sometimes I go to events and people say things that are incredibly insulting. I have had people say to my face, oh, you don't look special. And you have to take that breath away, or no one would have known there was anything wrong with you. That is when I get a lot. And it's still tough for me. Like, I'm in the
Yeah.
space, I understand ableism, I teach about ableism, and still when it happens, you have that moment of, whoa. And so if you're someone who's being public in their workplace, I want you to be mindful that you may face some ableism and understand that we still have a lot of work to do, which is why CDL is here and why we have a podcast as an organization, because we want to get the message out about things like this and reduce the stigma. I would love it if right now there is a boss who is listening to this and they've just had an employee ask for an accommodation and they realize that they're kind of being unreasonable about it. Because the other issue with accommodations is, yes, you can receive accommodations, but are they done to the full spirit of it? Or is it someone just ticking a box saying they gave you that accommodation?
Yeah, that kind of brings me into my next question, is what are maybe some of the reasons why, an employee might choose not to disclose to their employer, like in the workplace or even to their coworkers?
I'll tell why I didn't disclose at one of the last places I worked, which is a wonderful place, but I wanted to apply for the executive director position whenever it became open. And I thought if I start here and I tell them that I'm autistic, that they might not think I'm capable of leadership.
Right.
And so I didn't disclose. Now, looking back, I wish I had have and just been more authentic, because I ended up having to disclose because I ended up needing more support, or things would
Right.
happen and I'd be like, I need to explain this from my perspective, and here's some stuff you don't know about. So you're going to come up against people's unconscious biases about you and what you're able to do. Even though you would be protected under the law, AODA is the law of the province, you may be terminated for reasons that they don't say this is why you're being terminated, and that's the case. And if you feel you've been wrongly terminated, please consult with a lawyer. We're not giving any legal advice, but please consult with a lawyer if that's something that's happening. You might find yourself passed up for promotions, or you might find that people make little comments, or that suddenly everyone becomes more aware of what you're doing. So they might notice that you leave a little early, or it can become a focus. We still, especially in this province, have a lot of work to do on making workplaces neurodiverse friendly. As you know, I do these trainings a lot, and I go to workplaces and I talk to them about it. And it's great that so many workplaces are open, but I will tell you, a lot of them are not doing some of the things we preach already.
Yeah.
And so it's something to be mindful of. And that's why you might want to disclose in a way that is more natural for you. Maybe you want to tell a coworker first who you really trust, keeping in mind you might not know how that they react before you go to HR or take those steps.
Yeah, and I think that kind of leads us into navigating that process at work. I know you had touched on, your legal rights as an employee, but also in a previous episode, we talked about when a parent is disclosing to potentially a coach or a camp, and maybe what to include versus what not to include when talking about that.
Yeah, so each workplace is different on exactly what you'll have to disclose, but most of the time you only have to disclose what the accommodation is, not necessarily the reasoning behind it. So that's like the formal legal thing. You may say, I need extra time, or I may need to leave at lunch and have a longer lunch, or I may need my boss to provide me all instructions in writing. You may not necessarily have to disclose why that is. Your employer can ask for further documentation. That'll go workplace to workplace. But the other thing we're talking about with disclosure, and I think that is more related to neurodiversity than possibly other types of accommodations, is sometimes it is helpful to tell people you're neurodiverse to have a greater understanding of how to communicate. I can give a perfect story to this. And if they're watching and they want to actually formally sponsor this episode, I'll say where I went. So I recently went to get LASIK done. And I had some normal, I don't even want to say difficulties, but just my healing wasn't as perfect as sometimes it can be. And it made me very anxious, and I didn't understand. And I was like having a moment where I'm like, no, I don't understand what you're saying. Wait, can you go over all of the possibilities that could come from this happening? And I was having a moment, and I could see there was about to be a moment of tension. And I said, I'm autistic, and that's why this is so hard for me. Right. And he's like, oh, let me go get someone. And he went and got his manager, who has someone in their life that is autistic. And she's like, what do you need? And I was like, I need to know a couple what ifs, and then I'm going to be happy. So I was like, okay, so what happens if I go home and the pain doesn't get better because of this drop? Okay, what do I do if on the weekend the pain gets bad and you're closed? What am I going to do? And she walked me through it, and she said, let's book an appointment for Monday morning first thing, so that you know that you're going to see us again, and you know the time. And I was like, okay, awesome.
Yeah.
And it was a moment that could have been a moment of like a lot of tension, and them thinking that I was being difficult, because on the surface it looked like difficulty. It looked like defiance. It was looking like I didn't want to listen to what they were saying. But in my head, when they're saying, well, some people it takes 2 to 3 days and some people it takes 2 weeks, I was like, well, what does that mean? And when they're like, some people feel some discomfort, I'm like, what does discomfort mean? Yeah. How much discomfort is too much discomfort? What should I look for? When do I know that it's going bad? Like, I had all of these questions. And the second they understood what I needed, they were able to give it to me. And that was amazing. And I was really, really happy with how I was treated afterwards, because they understood those pieces. One accommodation that they gave me, so because I want to highlight that accommodations can work, is they would give me the first appointment of the day, because they knew that like waiting can make my anxiety worse. So they'd say, have the first appointment of the day, then you're not going to wait. You're going to come here and we're going to see you first thing. Yeah. That was a simple accommodation that they gave to me, and it made my experience so much better. And I think if I hadn't disclosed to them, I think I might have been written off as difficult. And so that's just a positive story of where it can help build understanding. You know, at work, I talk about how sometimes, like, don't read into my email tone. Because my email, like, my Teams messages are super friendly. I'm super friendly to your face. Emails, I sound so mean in my emails. Like, sometimes even I go back and read them. I'm like, that isn't what I meant. I don't know what it is about me and emails, but it is true. You can confirm, Jordan. It's true. My emails can be very so to the point that, like, but I now know to tell everyone, if I send you an email and you go, ooh, contact me, because I would never choose to actually be angry at someone through an email. I'm a more like, let's talk it out kind of person. So if you think I'm angry in an email, I'm not. It's just, do I need more like exclamation points, some emoji? I don't know. I'm just so straight to the point in an email that it leads to that.
I know if there's a warmly at the end, you're not mad.
Yes. If you get a regards, that's not good. Or if you get nothing, if you get the dash, that is, I am very not happy about what is transpiring in this email chain. But I know one day I am going to forget to type the warmly. Like, it's happened before, where I just don't type it, and someone's going to be like, oh my gosh, she did not say warmly. Because that's how I sign off all my emails. Because one of the ways that I self-accommodate is to have it always be the same no matter what. Yeah. So that no one can read into whether I say thanks or whether I say best or whether it's always warmly. Yeah.
I think that is super important. I know mine is always best on my email signature. But I think that also kind of plays back into the workplace culture. And, you know, after you disclose, or if you choose not to disclose, you know, if your workplace culture is, let's say, maybe a bit more on the negative side or the toxic side, you know, you need to think of yourself as well at the end of the day, and how it's going to impact your mental health and your well-being being in the workplace. I was going to ask if you might have like a tip or advice for someone who might be kind of navigating more of a quote-unquote toxic workplace, where, you know, they don't want to disclose because of that.
The biggest thing, if you're in a workplace like that, and I wish we lived in a world where I could just say leave and go get another
Yeah.
job. We don't live in that world, and you may be in a job that is not neuroaffirming, and that can be exhausting. So I first want to say I'm sorry that you're there. I've been there. It's so tough, and I know that's a weight that you carry all the time. The tip is, even if your employer isn't going to give you accommodations, try to work in as many self-accommodations as possible to make your work better. So, for example, if you really struggle with leaving a meeting and knowing what the action items are, I always end every meeting with, I'm going to check with you to make sure I've got all of my action items. So when I take notes, I put little stars, and then I put it into my Microsoft Planner right away. That's how I help myself. A self-accommodation might be working out on your lunch break or before work or after work, incorporating that self-care during your day. Another important tip is that you need to not feed into the toxicity and make the choice to rise above it. One of the things that can plague neurodiverse individuals in toxic workplaces is our desire to be understood and the trigger around feeling ununderstood. So you can get into toxic situations where you're like, no, what I really meant was this, and this is why I'm doing this, and you're over explaining and you're actually feeding into that toxicity. And so you want to protect your own self, and it's important to then connect and have those connections with people outside of work who can help ground you and talk it through. One of the things I would counsel all neurodiverse individuals to do is understand how they process information. I'm a verbal processor. If I'm not talking, I'm probably not really processing it. So I know I have to talk it out. You might be someone who likes to draw it out. You might be someone who needs quiet time. Make sure that you're giving yourself the things that you need. It's important to note, just because someone else isn't giving you what you need. So if an employer is not giving you what you need, it doesn't mean you don't deserve that thing. You deserve to have accommodations even if other people are denying them to you. So if other people are denying you things that help your wellness, you deserve self-care, and you deserve to give that to yourself.
I think, building those trusting environments in the workplace and outside of the workplace, having that person in your life where you can go to after work, after you've clocked out, and, talk to them about how your day went or how your week is going and everything like that. I think just, holding space for those people in your personal life is so important to, the whole disclosure process in the workplace. I have, just kind of to summarize our episode and everything that we've discussed, what is one thing you would say to someone who's wondering if they should disclose but isn't sure where to start?
As I said before, start with your employee handbook. Go and look through that. You may also want to look through your records to show, do you have the documentation to, I hate to use the word justify, but justify the accommodations. Wanting to acknowledge that in our community, the barriers to being diagnosed exist. And for all of you who can't disclose in the workplace because you're watching this and you're self-diagnosed because you're facing barriers, we see you, and we know that that's a tough road in the workplace as well. So start with that employee handbook. Start with looking over your own documentation. Look into self-accommodations and see how many accommodations you can just give yourself in the workplace. And understand that it's a journey. You don't have to have one accommodation conversation. So in that employee handbook, that's the first time you ask for accommodations. They can change over time. So keep consulting that employee handbook and follow that process to get what you need. And neurodiverse individuals deserve accommodations. That is how we use the magic of our brain to bring things to the world. So don't be afraid of accommodations. And if you need them and you are in a safe workplace, you should ask for them.
Yeah, I think that is, that self-advocacy for yourself is such an important piece. But I just wanted to say thank you, Carolyn. This was such a great conversation for this episode, and I really hope for those who are listening, you found some insight or some tips on kind of some of the things that we discussed. Is there anything that you wanted to plug or talk about CDL or anything coming up?
I want to plug our trainings. So if you are at a workforce and while you're listening, you're nodding and you're saying, I wish there was more of this at our workplace, please go onto our website. You can send us an email about our community training, and we will come into your workplace and we will give training specific to the work that your workplace does and what accommodations can look like in your workplace. Because sometimes the barrier is, I don't know how that would work here. This is our culture. That might change. We can come and work with you to create a workplace that has the accommodations you need.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks for listening, everybody. If you like this episode or if there's a topic that you'd like us to discuss more, you can leave a comment or send us an email or message us.
Thanks, guys. I'll see you in the next one.
Thank you for listening to the Neurodiverse Lens, a CDL podcast. For more information, visit diverselearners.ca.